Okay, so I'm going to talk today about the energy of livelihood. And when I knew I was going to talk about right livelihood, I was not so thrilled about this topic. It felt a bit slippery to me. I had a block. I just was really struggling with it. And then I was talking with Booker the other day, and I've gotten involved with this group of people who are looking to bring some practice to couples where they're dealing with dementia. So one partner has dementia and the other partner is caring for them. And I was talking about it, and Booker said something to me like, "Oh, your face lit up when you were talking about that." And something about when she said that clicked for me. And all of a sudden I was like, oh, okay, I can reconnect with this, because I was having a really hard time. So Joy started talking about right livelihood last week, and Cormac talked about it the week before. And I'm gonna go back to the beginning of how the Buddha defines right livelihood, because I think it kind of makes me laugh, because on the surface it really doesn't say very much, at least the way I'm reading it. He says, or she or they, what is right livelihood? There is the case where a disciple of the noble ones, having abandoned dishonest livelihood, keeps his life going with right livelihood. This is called right livelihood. And that's about it. I'm like, that's it? That's what you have to say about this? And then I read some more. And I was reading about how right view is really at the forefront of right livelihood, because it's right view that allows us to see what is going to be really enriching for ourselves and for other people. And there are some examples of what wrong livelihood is. Joy talked about some of that last week, but scheming, persuading, belittling, pursuing gain with gain. And I was struck this morning, I was having a conversation with this really beautiful being, and she was talking about her work, and she has a very deep practice, and she works in a residence of people who have dementia. And she was talking about why she can't bring the practice of meditation into her center. And I thought this was such a beautiful example of how right view combines with right effort and mindfulness. Because what she was talking about is how people in a place like where she's working have to have a certain amount of armor in order to do this work. And that when she has brought meditation into her workplace for the residents who are dealing with dementia, or the staff in the middle of a workday, that it strips away this layer of protection that is really hard to find safety in going back to work right after that, even if it's for like 10 or 15 minutes and they're doing a loving kindness meditation. That then that guard that goes down when they go back out into the world of this really hard environment, that it feels, there's something about it that feels not right, like she's somehow done them a disservice. And it really made me think about how something that is so beautiful, right? The practice that can give me so much awareness and nourishment that in a certain place, this practice might not be called for in a certain moment. And I thought, oh, that is the definition of right livelihood, that she's bringing right view to something. She is putting effort into what's going to be helpful or not helpful, and she's really paying attention. And that's how interconnected all these pieces are of right livelihood, that it's not just about livelihood. It's about these other pieces of the Eightfold Path that intertwine with it. Bhikkhu Bodhi, he talks about right livelihood. He talks about how, along with right action and right speech, that these three pieces, right livelihood, right action, and right speech, are all part of sila, and that sila is about our moral and ethical conduct. And he uses this word, harmonizing. And I thought that's such a beautiful way to talk about how these pieces interact. And he says, sila harmonizes our actions by bringing them into accord with our own true interests, with the well-being of others, and with universal laws. And so I thought about, these three work together in this way. And one of the ways we can read our own energy, right, is when there's energy flowing in the work that we're doing. When we feel this energy that is almost moving outward to other people of, oh, this feels so right. The other thing that I'm learning to appreciate in looking a little bit deeper at right livelihood is that it's a practice. One of the things that Bhikkhu Bodhi also wrote about is how the Eightfold Path is really focused on practicing. And again, this idea of bringing our practice off the cushion into the world. And it made me think of something that Joy had talked about a few weeks ago of yogi jobs at retreat, and how that is such a clear, like a stark example of right livelihood and how these pieces are interconnected, right? Because every job at a retreat center, when we go on retreat and we have a yogi job, whether it's cleaning the bathroom or chopping vegetables or sweeping the floor, if we bring right view, we start to see that there is an interconnectedness amongst all of us, that place, that retreat center really couldn't exist without everybody having their little job. That's what helps it run. And then if we bring to it an effort, then we're actually really doing a job with detail. And if we bring mindfulness to it, then we're seeing and reminding ourselves how of what arises for us when we're doing this job. I may really dislike the job I'm doing, and what is it like to be in relationship with that when I'm doing something that is in the service of not only myself and others as well. So the yogi jobs at retreat are, to me, this really beautiful example. And then we can bring that out into the wider world of how interconnected we are with each other. And that's the other piece about right livelihood. There's actually a foundation called the Right Livelihood Foundation. I didn't know that until I was learning about this. And they give laureates, they give awards every year. And there's a really beautiful man, Ray Sasana, in 2005. He received the laureate, and he's from Botswana. He's actually the leader of one of the Bushman tribes there. And here's what he said when he gave his acceptance speech. I love this because it's about the interconnectedness of our livelihood, right? He says, we are the ancestors of our grandchildren's children. We look after them just as our ancestors look after us. We aren't here for ourselves. We are here for everyone and for the children of our grandchildren. Right? I won't go totally off topic, but we could talk about ecology, right? Our environment. That's it right there, what he's talking about, taking care. We're here for the children of our grandchildren. So when I think about right livelihood, I think that can be taking care of anyone. It doesn't need to be work that is paid, right? It can be whatever it is that we're doing in our lives that is serving. And there's still yet another way to think about right livelihood, and I appreciate this. It's such a reminder to me of how important the precepts are. So when we think about the precepts, there is a sense of abstaining. There's a sense of refraining from certain actions, right? I refrain from taking life. Or if I want to think about it more broadly, right? I refrain from harming myself or other people. And again, this is a shout out to Joy and Booker, because this is something that the two of them have talked about, this idea of what happens when I'm so busy that I'm harming myself. And we've talked about this before, right? What happens when I'm so busy that I'm not taking care of myself? How can I truly be there for anybody else? So this, for me, is where the energy piece comes back in, because I think about right livelihood in the time of the pandemic and the racial protests. And when the pandemic first hit and the protests began, I was looking around me a lot for this idea, to get some sort of idea of how do I be with all of this? How do I serve? How do I serve? And all that kept coming up at first was, I can't, that what I'm doing is not enough, and that everybody is doing more than I'm doing, and I'm not doing enough, so I'm not enough. You know, we can go down that whole road. And I really had to reframe it. I had to remember that that it's okay to earn a living. You know, that was a piece. There was like at the beginning, there was a guilt around, I need to earn a living to take care of my family so that my kids can finish college. There was guilt around that, and I really had to come up close to that and feel it. And then once that eased a little bit, and I gave myself permission around that, then I was thinking about, okay, how much energy do I have, like, what can I do beyond my work? Where can my energy go? And the things that popped in beyond my work was my family. So I have my partner, my husband, works in a nursing home. And if you remember at the beginning of the pandemic, the nursing homes were hit so hard. And so there was a lot of need to protect kind of his safety around that and be sure that I wasn't bringing other things into the house that could, then he could take to the nursing home and other people could get sick. I was thinking about my dad, who is 89. I know I talk about him a lot. And how isolated he was because he couldn't really go out and do anything. And so there was this question of, how do I serve my dad so that he is not alone? And I have a couple of friends who were also living alone and feeling really isolated. And so when I realized that I couldn't, that going to the protests and leaving my job were not in the cards, I decided that I was going to drill down into the few areas that I could really make a difference. And they might not be big in the world sense, but they would make a difference for the people in my life. And that's how I got through, in a sense, Right Livelihood during the pandemic, and continue to, and the racial protests. And there's a certain other energy that I look at as well. And that energy is, what kind of serving nourishes me? Because if it's nourishing me, then it certainly is nourishing another. If I'm doing work that inspires me in some way, then that is felt on the other end. And if I'm doing work that is depleting me, that is taking away, where there's no energy, then am I really serving the other person well? And there have been some uncomfortable moments for me during these last several months where I realized that some of the people that I was serving in my professional life, clients that I was working with, that I actually was not serving them in a way that was kind. I might have been doing the right thing on the surface. You know, I was meeting them for their sessions and I was listening. And there was this awareness of, I'm not really all there for several of my clients. And being honest about that and what I was going to do with that was complicated. It still is complicated because I keep coming back to that question of, who do I serve and how do I serve them? And then when I realize that my work isn't serving somebody, what do I do with that? How do I be with that? What is the right action in that moment? And I don't have answers for all these things. They're questions that arise and I wrestle with them. So I'm going to finish with a poem, and then we'll step into our next kind of activity. This poem is by a Japanese artist who lived in the 1700s, and his name, if I'm saying it correctly, is Hokusai. And I think this poem captures right livelihood in many ways, so I'll just read it. Hokusai says, look carefully. He says, pay attention, notice. He says, keep looking, stay curious. He says, there's no end to seeing. He says, look forward to getting old. He says, keep changing. You just get more who you really are. He says, get stuck, accept it, repeat yourself as long as it's interesting. He says, keep doing what you love. He says, keep praying. He says, everything is alive: shells, buildings, people, fish, mountains, trees. Wood is alive. Water is alive. Everything has its own life. Everything lives inside us. He says, live with the world inside you. Live with the world inside you.